Hello, welcome to another episode of This Week in Metropolis. I'm James.
And I'm the one who can't be named. On this episode, we have Mark, who's the founder of Lesser Known Comics, upcoming US proudly independent comic book publisher. We talked to him about all his latest projects and what he's got coming up in the future and why he hates Amazon.
But before we get into that, thank you for everyone who follows us, who subscribes to the channel, and who genuinely likes or listens to our show. Keep following, keep sharing. We really appreciate the support.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome you to This Week in Metropolis.
Okay, welcome to another episode of This Week in Metropolis. This week we are joined by the founder of Lesser Known Comics. Mark, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on.
No, thank you for joining us. Thank you. Mark, we are aware of your Lesser Known Comics because of a previous guest that we had on, Patrick Hickey Jr., who came to us with, amongst other things, he came to us with his comic, Condry, which is on Lesser Known Comics website. Tell us about Lesser Known Comics and tell us about yourself.
So I joke that if anyone told me I was going to start a comic book publishing company, a year ago, I would have, been like, I don't know what you're talking about. And it kind of started with me, like everybody, right? You got stuck in quarantine. You're still stuck in quarantine, depending on where you're at, and got a lot of time to re-examine your life decisions and examine the lifestyle, right, that you want to live. So I said, okay, I'm gonna write a graphic novel. I've been doing some creative writing, but not seriously for a while. I made the mistake of thinking that a comic book would be easier than like a novel or something, which is insanely untrue.
Surely it's twice the work, isn't it? Because you've got the visual side as well.
Yeah, and to a certain extent as well, once the illustrator gets involved, as probably Patrick can attest to with Condry, you're not even in the driver's seat, a majority of the time. It's like doing a road trip and you go to sleep and someone else takes over the wheel and, they're going to drive where they're going to drive. So, so I started working with illustrators to make that happen. And it grew out of control faster than we thought. And my wife gave me permission to make a graphic novel. And then all of a sudden, there's conference calls happening and there's 14 other illustrators, creators, and people working.
That's amazing though. That is amazing how quickly it can kind of, like you said, I mean, maybe a little bit out of control at times, but at the same time, like for it to kind of blossom from it being just an idea that you obviously had, and then for it to kind of grow all these different arms and legs to it, and then have all these different people chipping in with their kind of ideas, that's quite a turnaround.
Yeah, well, my wife was certainly astonished. She's like, "Are you like? We didn't discuss a company. We discussed a book. This is very different."
Yeah.
And she's pregnant. She's due August 12th. So telling your pregnant wife that you started a comic book company. Oops.
Was this in addition to? I mean, was this a side project? What does Mark do on a normal day-to-day when this was all happening?
So I was in the Army for 18 years and I've been getting ready to separate. So I'm actually still technically on their books, but it's a lot of going to medical appointments and, filling out paperwork and a lot of sitting around and waiting. I mean, that's what the first 18 years of the Army is, a lot of sitting around and waiting. But so it was, let's get this comic book company to like a warm start so that once I retire, then I can just do that. But that's a hard thing to balance where you're just like, it definitely got out of control. And I've actually had to say, okay, institute rules where no matter what, at this time, the phone's got to go you got to go somewhere else. It can't be in my hand. You know, I got to go to bed at this amount of time. And, you know, so that is one of the struggles once you own your own endeavor, because it's no one locks up the office and sends you home.
Yeah.
You know, so.
What caused the sudden growth and that all of the sort of illustrators being involved? What was that? Just a natural thing, or how'd that come about?
I think it's the terms that we tend to use with the. So we don't do page rates. We don't do anything like that. What we do is everything's like flat rate. You know, so just make as much dope stuff you can. You know, in the given month, and what that allows them is some freedom to say, okay, I'm really sick of doing line work today. I'm gonna do something else. I'm gonna sketch a design or something like that. Promo art, like sometimes you just get sick of your own story just because you've been working on it day in and day out. And having the deadlines, a lot of the artists like are freelancers, for example, so they get other work opportunities to come in, and it's like, and sometimes you get those unicorn work offers where it's like, oh, someone wants to pay me way too much money to do something that's way too easy. I'm like, go do that. Like, I'll still be here. Like, don't worry. So I think that just latitude, that flexibility, and then also just giving the illustrators such freedom, so one of the examples is that I like to use is one of our characters has a near-death experience, and it ends up going like a psychedelic way. So I gave that illustrator like, here's what happens when that near-death experience starts, and like here's the panel that it's going to end with. Like, what you want that near-death experience to look like visually. Like, I shouldn't dictate that to you as a writer. Like, you are the one who's the visual storyteller. And that was Andrea who did that one, and what he came up with was just insane compared to what I could ever, tell him or. So he's having fun, I'm having fun, and we try and create that free space in each one of our scripts that makes it so that illustrators lose track of time, where they're like, oh man, like I'm having so much fun working on this.
Did you know any rules to running a comic book company? Was there any sort of research or understanding of, well, I need to, you were saying about page rates, for example. Was that something you was familiar with before, or was that just through conversation that you started learning these things?
I think, mostly through conversation. So the big thing is when you talk to the artist, because what's the parts about their job that they like the least, right? It's the person who's like, it's that difficult client, or that difficult partner that you're working with, so we actually drafted a mission statement together with all the different artists who wrote their input. They basically just describe the kind of company you want to work for, and they put that together, and it has things like I'm not going to put company time ahead of my family time, and that works out not just for family stuff, like Patrick's got kids, so like if kids are sick, that's what you're doing that day. Like, it doesn't matter what else was on the agenda. And then we got one guy who's a surfer, right? Like, if the waves are good, like that's where you need to be today,
just that flexible approach.
Yeah. And I think it's short-sighted, to be like, no, let's stick to an arbitrary deadline, because let's not pretend that like all the comic books aren't coming out on time anyway.
Yeah. Was you a fan of comic books prior to this? Was it something that's probably led to where all of these ideas have come from? So
I was a big fan of X-Men and Spider-Man, like cartoons, like that was like the Saturday morning cartoons, like here.
Classics.
Yeah. And so that's what led me to okay, now I got to get comic books. But I didn't grow up with a lot of money, so not a lot of comic books. And when HBO picked up that Watchmen series, and I realized, oh, like they're going off the comic book, not the movie. Like I'm gonna reread Watchmen, and And then I kind of realized, like, now that I was like, you know, an adult in his like mid 30s, like I was like, oh, comic books don't cost that much compared to like what I thought they cost when I was like a kid. Like, you know, $1 is like, you know, it's like a brick of gold at that age, you know, but now I'm like, okay, all right. So, so I started rereading through like all the X-Men stuff, you know, and it's weird because when I was little, like I only saw a couple issues. So I only knew from the animated series and a couple of like those key issues that you would pick up.
Yeah.
But it's almost like seeing a bunch of deleted footage that you've never seen for a movie, you know? So, and then I took I Googled making comics, like how to, and there's a guy, Scott Circlin, who has a Making Comics 101 YouTube channel. I watched all 71 videos, and then I emailed him and I was like, hey, Scott, can you help me make comics and like make sure that like from a comic book theory standpoint, we're like doing this right. And that's been super interesting. And I love that relationship. Just, I meet with him once a month and I show him everything we're laying out and all the sketchboards and everything. And he's just, it's been so fun to have someone, you know, who's been making them for, you know, 30 years. Yeah.
Was there anything in your mind that you thought, I know you said about speaking to the illustrators, but was there anything personally that you thought, I really don't want to do this? Or alternatively, is there anything that you thought, I really want to do, you know, this particular thing in terms of subject matter or genre or whatever it may be?
That's a good question. I think, so we do things, we try and do a hybrid of both like what Marvel does with having their own characters where illustrators come in and they're working with characters. So I have my own characters and some of the illustrators the majority of the illustrators are working with characters I created. And then there's some creator-owned content where Patrick essentially comes in with his own characters and he's just publishing through us. We do work in some like little Easter eggs. So like, you know, in the, on a TV screen in one of my comics, it'll say something like on the news, you know, that alludes to like, you know, something is happening in the Conjuring timeline. And then we're picking up like a manga title that's, we're going to have one of our characters be like a fan of that manga series. So it's just, we keep those little, but we ended up going pretty hard towards this one character, you know, Danny, she's this witch and she's lived, you know, for, you know, 200 plus years. She's perpetually like 28. She's a punk rock witch, Latina, you know, kind of blundering her way through, you know, her immortal life because she's, because I was, initially she was not the main character, but initially there was going to be this other main character and she was going to be featured, but I had so many questions about this one that we kind of gravitated to it. We also have a lot of, you know, female illustrators on our team. So like, I think it's been fun to work on a female lead character. And I think from giving outside artists like a chance to come work with a character, it's I always compare her, she's like our Wolverine, because she's lived for so long, she's had all these different lives and she's done all these different things. So an illustrator can come in and draw her in a different style in a different time period, this different adventure that's doesn't touch anything else that's in canon right now. So even Kieran, who's working on the Conjuring series, you know, like he's doing one with that same character, drawing her in this like Mad Max meets Speed Racer type story. Because we're like, I don't know, what was she doing in the 50s? Like driving demolition cars and like, you know, chewing tobacco and, you know, blowing things up. You know,
cool.
Whatever, you know, like, so we've kind of gravitated towards that so that we can kind of mix that creator-owned content, but then, you know, they can also have some characters to play with, you know, and do some fun things.
That's cool if you've got that option of, like you say, different eras or times in history where you can drop her in and then it's a variation of what she was doing in that time period, if you know what I mean. I remember we had a friend of mine on the show many episodes ago who I grew up with, and he said for like years, we're talking like 10 years probably, he's had this idea of a comic book that he wanted to write, and he had a story, and literally getting it published and everything is amazing, and credit to him, and same goes to you, and same with Patrick. But the interesting thing was that in his mind, I think he's only done, what, Matt, is it 4 or 5 issues now? Yeah. But in his mind, he's got so much depth, and there's so much more for him to tell about, not just the main character, but all the side characters as well. With your one, is that a similar sort of thing? Have you got like a backlog of ideas of just things that potentially this could go some?
Yeah, definitely. And the story arcs that I thought I'd be working on are not the story arcs that we are working on, because the illustrators, because I said, okay, well, we have this one that's kind of taking place in the 1850s. It's more of like a Western gunslinger. And Katie said, dibs, I want that one. Like, let me take that one. Okay. So at the end of her finishing that mini, like, it's like, I was like, oh my gosh, this came out way different than I thought. We're going to spend a lot more time on this story arc than I initially thought. Same thing with how some of the characters are drawn in some of the action sequences. So I had a story that I thought was going to just be a mini. Once Abel, he's one of our illustrators from Spain, the time he spent, helping me build out the world for that particular mini, like I was like, oh, we could run this series, this could be an 8, 10, 20 issue story arc, just because it's, characters and the villains, I had like what I thought was kind of like a throwaway villain. I was like, oh no, she's really cool. Like she's gonna stick around. So there is a whole backlog of stuff. It's like, oh man. And one of our other illustrators and writers, Charlie Ragnarok, we joke all the time. We're like, there's never enough time to, we're never gonna get to these things. Because we have also other, stories that are either too goofy or like, we don't know how to execute it. So we'll never get around to it. So, but we're like, they bring us personal joy. So, but it's a good problem to have, I guess, right?
Of course, yeah, definitely. Do you get them, are all of your ones, because obviously they're available on Lesser Known Comics website. Do you get them all printed as well? Are they all physical copies that you own as well?
Yeah, so initially we're just making them available via the Kickstarters. So we ran one, so that's where most people can get physical copies. We've dropped physical copies for free off at comic book stores. Yeah. We have like a no Amazon policy, which is kind of like a big thing for us. It was a thing that kind of grew out of control. So initially we were like, logistically, we said, well, we'd much rather give somebody a comic book for free at a comic book store than have them order at Amazon. Yeah. For the money we've missed out, we'd much rather support like a comic book store, because the assumption is if someone goes into a comic book store, they're going to buy something else if they went in there for something free. And then we were visiting some comic book stores and we were joking around and we said, oh yeah, for free comic book day, we'll write fuck Amazon, like just in big letters. And the comic book store I was at, they were just like, oh, I'll order 50 copies of that. And I was like, okay, I guess we'll do it. And then, it's been interesting to watch that, because depending on where you are, different parts of the world, that, because we have one illustrator in Italy. There's no love for Amazon in Italy. So, I've gotten some feedback from people who are like, hey, don't pick on Amazon. I'm like, well, they're like a $1 trillion company. They'll be fine.
I'm sure they're not kind of wounded.
And I have friends and family that work for Amazon. And I hit them up and I was like, hey, before you hear anything, like, because I didn't want it to be like, hey, what are you working on? And they're like, oh, don't look at this cover. Like it says, but they thought it was funny and they got the joke.
if they bump into Jeff Bezos and he brings it up, don't kind of drop me in it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's commendable, really. Like, it's a bit like taking comic books away from it, about shopping locally at little independent stores rather than going to big supermarket chains or whatever. And the same goes for comic book stores. Is from your understanding, are they struggling with the big firms like Amazon?
It depends on the store. So there's certainly not a lot of affection for Amazon at the comic book stores. I think we have a newer generation that doesn't maybe understand what a local comic book store has to offer, right? Because the good ones, you have your subscriptions and you have the things you come in for, but those folks that work in those stores, they read comics every day. So they're going to say, like, James, Matt, like, I know you like this. You will also, you most likely, and there's no Amazon algorithm that's going to give you that, those types of recommendations. And most oftentimes those algorithms are based on who's paying to be ranked higher in those algorithms. Yeah. Because I've gotten referred to some stories that I was just like, no one's ever heard of them. It was made by some, local indie guy, and it's, that's the type of experience you should have in those stores,
And I guess with you being sort of your brand and your sort of work being in those environments, it then makes you part of that community as well, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think at the end of the day too, like book signings, things like that, they're going to have to happen at those local comic book shops. They could, evolve to survive that, without a brick and mortar store. But I think just having a store that you can go in, there's nothing like a comic book shop on a Wednesday with a bunch of people. It's one of like the last bastions of like healthy debate, because people don't know how to talk about politics or anything or religion anymore, right? They just turn into immediate assholes to each other. So, but you could have a healthy debate with somebody and be like, no, like Justice League is garbage. Like Avengers is like where it's at. And no one's like, no one's, dividing family and friends over that. Right. Yeah. But you can still, I appreciate that. It's like that in sports. The last two people, you can tell somebody that their opinion's complete trash and not.
well, seeing as you brought it up, Mark, who is the better? Is it Justice League or is it Avengers?
It's absolutely Avengers. I just, that's and I was joking the other day because Patrick, he's from New York. I'm from California. Me and him are very different style, very different pace. But we both agree on Marvel over DC. That's one thing that me and him definitely.
A question that I've got for you: what are you more proud of? Are you more proud of that physical copy of your lesser-known comic, or the website in which you've created this platform for, like you say, independent writers and illustrators and things like that? What are you more proud of?
I think. So something funny actually happened like minutes before, like I it came on. We had some troll, say something, to Katie, one of our illustrators, and to see Yvette and Charlie and Patrick and, just like come to be like, hey, fuck off, and I was like, so like, because these people haven't met each other in person. Yeah. They've just been working, creating comics in the same space since about, January, February. And something about that camaraderie, even if it's just, trolling back on some asshole that, wanted to, give Katie a hard time about being a female gamer, which is like, and so that part, I think the team part is just like really what's the most special to me. And I've done a lot of work to try and like create a space for artists, but I haven't gotten everything right. You know, I've done, you know, because I've never done a comic book company before, you know. No. So definitely delays and fuck ups and this and that and the other thing, you know, having a team that's also like had my back and give me patience, you know, have patience with me as I figure this stuff out. Like, you know, I get a little in my heart over that kind of stuff. So, cool. But yeah, and I know Patrick has told me what it was like to hold his comic, you know, in his hand for the first time.
He said to us about that when we spoke to him.
Yeah, and our next batch will be like the first one that the majority of our illustrators will have, you know, a copy of their comic in their hand, and I, you know, I just hope that, you know, like I can, you know, allow them to have that feeling as well, you know, once we send those in the mail.
That's awesome. What's the biggest lesson you've learned then of sort of, well, it doesn't have to be what not to do, but you know, in your journey so far?
That's it. Yeah. You know, I think the big thing that I learned was these things tend to grow out of your own control, you know, so just because you didn't put it on the agenda does not mean that it's not going to be, you know, on the agenda. So with, you know, that being said, I think what I would caution anybody that's coming on, you know, to a certain endeavor, I think the best thing we did to control that was come up with that mission statement so that we kind of have like principles and whatnot to, you know, to guide us and say, okay, well, you know, at the end of the day, you know, what are we really here to do? You know, we're here to, you know, make comic books, you know, and to treat each other, you know, fairly. So all those missteps, you know, you have a better recovery place if you have a single point to kind of come back and regroup from.
Mm-hmm. Could anyone potentially come to you and say, for example, could me and Matt go, we should make a comic book about the podcast that we do, and each issue could have one of our guests. I mean, Mark could be in issue 6 for this section. Could we create a comic and come to you and say, we've got this idea, what do you think? Could we potentially make our own comic?
Yeah, that's not a pitch, by the way. Unless you like it. If you like it, it's definitely a pitch. Yeah.
So John from Basement Comics, he's got another podcast called Basement Surge. They have a miniature comic that they do shorts with, and yeah, so it's certainly a cool idea. The because I told him, you know, the cool thing about comics, and if you excuse me for grabbing a visual example, is you got to print in increments of 4, right? Which is something I learned. So what do you do with that extra, you know, those extra 3 pages you didn't account for? So we have been putting other indie creators, you know, some of their shorts that we like, or ads for, you know, stuff that we're a fan of. And we do all that, you know, for free because I'm paying for the pages anyway. Like, why who cares? So we kind of feel that same way with any creator at any, you know, whatever their particular situation is. So we recently just had a creator, his name's Soren. He has 2 really amazing comics, and he was just like, okay, so now what? I don't know what to do with them, you know. Can I publish them through you? And I was like, absolutely, you know. And we, you know, we had a conversation. I was like, this is my first comic book, you know, company. And he's actually one of the ones with the manga style, you know, title. And I was like, I've never promoted, you know, that type of title. I think, you know, I have ideas how to do it. So bear with me, and you know, we'll do what we can. And that's been a good like basis, you know, to start off with. Because we already have, you know, use economic terms, we already have sunken costs, right? We have a graphic designer, we already have a website, we already have a shop, we've got the social media and the ad space. And then if we're going to print in bulk, like to throw other comics in there, there's another comic book publisher named Alterna that's here in the US that they print all their stuff on newsprint. So they used to do a thing where they say, well, just jump on our newsprint run because like we're already paying for it in bulk. So like come, so similarly for us, if somebody said, hey, I have to pay this much to get my comic books printed because I only have this much money, but if I was printing it in bulk, I would do it for like email us, like, because we're already printing a crap ton of comics, it's easy for us to go to our printer and say. So yeah, it just depends on what the individual needs. If they also want to put the LKC, logo on it, and make it part of our brand. We want to be the cool kids table, but we also want to be like, hey, like you can sit with us, like, like there's no limit. And I think, that would be a good problem to have if I said, hey, like, we've grown too big that, I can't do your comic justice, and at that point, we'll figure out ways to expand and partner with other folks. But certainly, the tough part too, is there's so many amazing illustrators and creators that are out there. We actually just found one that just did a variant cover for us, and I'm looking at his art and I'm like, dude, how do you only have 162 followers? Like your art's insane. Like it's I've never seen anything like it. He's like, I don't know how to do Instagram. I was like, okay, well I do. So you handle the art and I'll handle the gram. Like we'll be fine. So those kind of things all day long. But 90% of the time is just sending that email. So I always encourage somebody, there's no awkward email that's too awkward for us. Just be like, I don't know what I'm doing. Let's make comics. That's like just send that and we'll start from there. That's a good starting point. But so many people just don't send the email because they're afraid of the rejection part, and that's not something we're really interested in doing. We're more interested in saying, hey, it's not a good fit, it's not a good fit, but we also make recommendations too, like, hey, like this is a sci-fi publisher that'd be way better, to handle your guys' stuff, or I would suggest reaching out to this person because they may help you with X, Y, and Z, so I think building that community, is really the first step.
With the social media side of things, and this is very relevant for sort of artists as well, do you ever find yourself getting preoccupied with followers and I've posted that and I was expecting that to get a lot more
likes or
traction or likes or whatever? Do you get stuck in that at all?
Yeah, so there's so many documentaries out now that's talking about like the negative effects of like social media, right? So I'm on my phone 90% of the day. Like 90% of the work day, I'm doing my work on the phone. And that's a difficult like understanding that like, was what I saw today good because it's good for the company, or was it good because Instagram and Facebook wanted me to think that it was good? So I don't think I've mastered like differentiating those, but it's good to have, we got another, one of the business analysts on the team, Aaron, he like almost never touches the internet. So that's a good sounding point to like talk to somebody and be like, okay, that's cool, but here's what's happening in the real world. We still got bills to pay and things.
Good balance.
Yeah. So, my recommendation for anybody is always, like anchor yourself somewhere outside of the digital realm. The digital realm is the future. So like, not to undercut, Instagram has allowed us to, reach thousands of people that there's just no way you could do in physical space. I mean, look at what we're doing here, so.
Well, exactly. Same for us, definitely.
And it's a little weird to see strangers giving you money. That's a weird thing, right? Like random person started following you, random person donated to your Kickstarter, and you don't know anything about, and you're just like, oh, wow, like, it's just an odd feeling.
Yeah.
But I guess that's a credit to you because and your team, because then that random person is looking at what you're putting out there and is going
appreciating it.
Yeah, appreciating it, and it's more of a kind of pat on the back for you guys. I mean, we don't monetize our podcast yet. One day, maybe, who knows? But even, and I'm sure even if you take the money away from it, you know, someone picking up a copy of your, or taking the time to go and read your comic, or check out the site in general, is just, or liking on, you know, and I always say it doesn't matter if one person likes your post, really. One person has enjoyed what you've put out there. It'd be amazing to have 1.2 million people like your post or whatever, which most celebrities tend to get for content that usually isn't that great in comparison. But I think when you're doing something independently and, you know,
you love it.
Yeah, it's something that you've put a lot of effort into, and someone else appreciates that. I think it goes a long way.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, I'm trying to focus on the gratitude portion of it because I played music when I was younger, you know, and, you know, we were playing venues at 250, 500 people or whatever, right? But like at the time I kept thinking like, oh, like we need to be in a bigger place. We need to be on the road. And I didn't enjoy, I didn't get to savor in that moment, you know, whether it's 5 people who think that your music's cool or it's 100 people, like it's just amazing that you make anybody feel anything, you know? Yeah. So I try to take those like pauses to like step back and be like, and one of the nice parts is, you know, I mean, we have an artist coming on board that joined because they were a fan of one of the other artists that, you know, we had, you know, so like, you know, makes her feel like super special, like that. Oh, yeah. Like somebody who follows me and like, you know, a big fan of my work is you know, and that was actually the same way with you know, with Kieran. We added Abel, and he didn't really realize until after the fact. He's like, oh, I follow him on Instagram because his art's amazing. You know, it's like, yeah. So it's cool, and it's funny too. There's a lot of like imposter syndrome. Like everyone feels like, oh, like maybe I don't belong here because everybody else is so much, you know, better than me. Yeah. You know, and that's just kind of goes with, you know, a lot of what we do.
Yeah.
You mentioned sort of, you know, doing music in the past. Is there any other sort of medium that inspires you with your creativity or with the business?
Yeah, music's a big one, you know, so me and Charlie, for example, exchange playlists, you know, oh, this is what I was listening to while creating.
Who's on the playlist? Just I'm always intrigued.
Oh gosh, so in the last one, there was some Blondie. There was this band called 48 Graves. There was a lot of Distillers. So there was, yeah. So you know, just she tends to do like a lot of things having to, yeah, it's a good soundtrack for like, I don't know, doing like girl power devil worshipping. I don't know. That would probably be like if I was to name her playlists.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Sounds cool. I mean, this is one of the questions we asked Adam when he was on about his comic. Would the dream be to one day for this to be made into a series like Invincible, which I don't know if you've seen, or a movie of some sort? And then on the flip side to that is, who would play which characters? Have you ever thought that far ahead? Would you have that dream of one day to see it on a screen?
Yeah, so one of the titles that we're releasing, So I Worked at the Mall, is one of the titles that Charlie both wrote and illustrated. And you know, the elevator pitch, it's a female version of Clerks, you know, in essence, you know, it's I could see that as an animated series in a heartbeat. Same thing. Yeah, I mean, that would be the dream. And I think we've actually had somebody who works in indie film reach out to Katie Drinkwine, who said, I want to make this comic that's essentially an adaptation of a screenplay that could be used to pivot into, you know, a movie pitch. And yeah, I love that stuff, you know. Yeah, all he said, and that's the great part too also about comics, is the elevator pitch are like, if it's more than like 5 or 6 words, like it's too long, right? Because all I heard was Frankenstein and samurais, and I was like, yeah, sold. Like whatever the script is, and like just send it, you know, like, I mean, I was like, and whatever you're gonna tell Katie, just say those 2 words, and I'm sure she'll be in, you know.
Amazing.
Would you though, with sort of James saying about being made into a screen sort of thing? Obviously, like the animated thing that James just mentioned is on Amazon Prime, for example. So that would be the dilemma. If Amazon came to you and said, look, we want to turn your comic into a animated series, how would that sit? And would you still say, fuck you, Amazon? You're not having my stuff.
That's a good question. You know, I have to think about like The Simpsons used to openly mock Fox, you know, on their show. So that would be the 2 things that I would have like stipulated in contract. Like the money is like almost like, you know, like it'd be great, right, to get like a big payout. But like I have to own the soundtrack. Like I have to have executive call on any music associated with anything. And then I would want to be able to openly mock, you know, Amazon, especially on, you know, it's just like taking a dump on someone's front porch, you know, it's fine.
It's fine.
You know. Brilliant. So officially, for the record, so, you know, if Jeff Bezos is listening, you know, we'd love to take a dump on your front porch. I will take your money. I mean, that's America. If you can't take someone's money and then criticize them in the same sentence, you know, like you don't have any business being here.
Exactly. Can you give us a bit of an insight of what's coming to Lesser Known?
I actually just finished. I've been so poorly organized that I've actually had to like start to make like some sort of like tracker for the entire team, because but we have about 12 titles in the works right now. And those,
wow, how do you that seems a lot. Is in comic book terms, is that normal that you would have that sort of pipeline of work?
I don't think we're doing. The illustrators are doing fine. How well I'm handling it, that's a whole different story. Yeah. So, and like I said, those guys have all the patience in the world for me. And it's little things, right? Like Kieran had a wraparound cover for his latest Condry issue. So when we were putting together like the print proofs, like he was like, "Hey, you only had the front cover. Where's the back cover? It's supposed to be like a wraparound." I was like, my bad. Like, I know you told me that, you know, but we're working on 7 right now. So, but yeah, I think it's going fast, but I think there's like a strength in numbers. You know, people like to buy things on a Kickstarter or website in batches. It saves, you know, on the shipping, right? Rather than buy one comic book and pay through the nose for, for shipping, like buy, you know, somewhere 5 or 10. So yeah, and those are the kind of things that, you know, it's been difficult to keep up. So the plan is, once everything's about getting to October is our big Halloween, you know, that's when right now is pre-season to me. So like, you know, then we're going to be officially a comic book company, you know, in 2022. So October we'll take the holiday season to kind of plan, and then we'll do 22-page, you know, issues, you know, for the most part going forward. We'll probably take Condry 0 through 4 and combine it into like, you know, just paperback trade, so it'll be thicker. I think it'll be about 52 pages. We'll have a lot of 22 full page issues at that point. And at that point too, I'll sit with all the illustrators and say, and we'll plan out the story arcs. Which story arcs do you want to take for 2022? You know, do you want to just do one story? Do you want to split it up? How much of your original content versus the stuff that I'm generating. But that's the big plan. Get these next 2 batches out, and then set the agenda for 2022.
Okay, well, Mark, where can our listeners and our viewers find you and your lesser known comics company?
So best places to go: Instagram, it's just at lesser known comics, and then lesserknowncomics.com. Instagram is very regularly updated, and I'm running the messages. So you send a DM there, it's probably going to hit me. May not get back to you for a couple of days, but yeah, definitely will get back to you. And that's probably the best way. We're also on Twitter at Lesser K Comics, and then on Facebook, Lesser Known Comics is the username.
Cool. Well, we will add all the links to your different sites and everything in the description. But for now, Mark, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, and cheers. Yeah.
Cheers. Cheers. Cheers.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that as much as we did. Don't forget, if you did enjoy it, please like, subscribe on whatever platform you're watching and listening on, because then that way you won't miss out on any future episodes we put out.
Yeah, and don't forget to follow us on all social media platforms as well. We're on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and give us a follow, and you'll be able to keep up to date with all of the latest episodes and posts that we put out there. But thank you for listening and watching.
And we'll see you next episode.